Hi everyone. Let me tell you what we are right now. So we are almost at the end of this semester, and including this lecture today, we just have four more lectures, and then we are finished. Excuse me. And then after we finish the last lecture, and then there will be a review period, and then we are going to have the final exam. And the final exam is scheduled on December the 5th, and it will be a take-home final exam, and it will be a coding exam only. Well, remember for the coding midterms, we have three questions for each of the coding midterm, but for the coding final, you are going to have uh, probably 10 or 11 questions. So it will be a huge coding final exam. Well, but for the coding exam, another thing you want to know is, well, there will be auto testing code. So when you code, excuse me, when you code your functions, and then you will just click and run the code, and then the auto test will tell you if you have already passed the test or not. Okay, so it will be kind of similar to the coding midterms. Okay, and today, as you see, we are going to start a new topic, tuples. And by the way, do you call that tuple or tuple? Well, I have taught this course before, and usually I ask my students this question, and most of my students will say that is tuple. Well, and then I also had a discussion with the professors, and it seems that the professors all say this is tuple. So it seems that we have some disagreement. It seems that for the older person, and then we say this is tuple. And of course, when I learned coding, and then my professor also told me it is tuple. But for the younger generation, it seems that you want to use tuple instead of tuple. But anyhow, I will try to use tuple in my lecture. But if I say tuple, don't get confused. Okay? So let's do a very quick review. Last lecture we talked about the string methods, and there are really a lot of the string methods, start with, end with, and upper, lower, and etc. So there are really a lot of them, and probably you don't really have to remember all of them, but you have to know how to find the how to find the Python official documentation. Well, that is the best thing you can have, and you can have the official explanation on how do they work. And for example, when you are doing a replace in a string, you are replacing a old string into a new string. And in this case, do you change the original string, or the original string will stay there, and then you are going to have a new string? So which one is true? And then you want to see the official documentation. Okay, and then we also talk about the string as a module, and then we have some of the predefined constants, and for example, the lower letters, the upper letters, the digits, etc. Okay, today we are going to see the tuple, and then we want to put tuple together with the list and the strings, and then we are going to see some of the comparison. They are kind of similar. Why? Because, the short answer is they are all sequenced data types. Okay, so we see a new data type, tuple, and then, you will see a lot of the operations on tuple are the operations we have already seen on the strings, on the list, etc. So the first thing, tuple. What is a tuple? Well, a tuple is another type of the collection of the items. When I'm saying it is a collection of the items, what does that remind you? That is list, right? Well, if we have a list and then we have a collection of the items, so why do we have tuple? Well, tuple is a data type cannot be changed in place. Well, if we have a data type, it cannot be changed in place. What is that? That is called immutable, right? So Python has two different types of the sequences. One is list, and remember the list is a mutable data type. And now we have another one, which is tuple. Tuple is also a sequence of items, but for tuple, they are immutable. That is the major difference between list and tuple. Well, or you can consider this way. Tuple is a immutable version of the list. Okay, well, and we can also have a collection of different number of the items, and those items can be different data type, and we can we can access by the indexing, and this means and we can use the index square brackets, and we can also use square brackets and then do a slicing. And for tuple, they are also nestable. And remember, for the list, they are nestable. So we can have a list inside another list, and then this is a nested list. And for the tuple, we can do the same thing. We can put one tuple as a member into another tuple. That is also okay. Well, and so let's see how we can define tuples. Well, and by definition, well, we do not have to use parentheses, but 99% of the time, and you will see people are using the parentheses to define tuples. And for example, if we want to define an empty tuple, and then that is the empty pair of the empty pair of the parentheses. And if we want to define a tuple with one item, and here is a small trick. Well, if you do a t2 equals the parentheses 0, comma, and that comma looks a little bit weird, right? Well, but if you have the 0 and then comma, this comma will remind Python that this should be treated as a tuple. Otherwise, if you have that comma removed, and then Python will say, Python will consider this as a number. So let me show you what do I mean. Say I have t2 equals parentheses and 0, comma. And then I want to print the type of the T2. And then let's see what do we have. Okay, we have a tuple, and that's exactly what we want to have. And if we remove this comma, okay, then it will be a 0 and then parentheses. So what will Python evaluate this version of the T2? Let me run this, and then you will see that is an int. Why? Because then Python will consider this as a mathematical expression. Well, Python will say, okay, this is 0 and then a 0 in a pair of parentheses. So Python will evaluate that, and then Python will say, okay, that is a 0, so it is an integer. Okay. Okay, let's come back. And for the T3, I'm putting an integer 0 and then a 9 and then a float number, another integer number, and then in parentheses. And for each of the member, they are separated by comma. And for the T4, okay, well, we have the parentheses removed. Okay, so for in Python, we do not have to use the parentheses to define tuples, but it's better that we do that. Okay, so even though we don't have the parentheses, it will still be evaluated as a tuple because that is a sequence of the items separated by comma. Well, and remember, if we are trying to define a list, and then you have to use the square brackets, but to define a tuple, you don't really have to use the parentheses. But to make your code easier to understand, I highly recommend you to use the parentheses. Okay. And then for the T5, that is a tuple inside another tuple. So we have a nested tuple. And in Python, that is also supported. And now we have the type. And if you want to make call the type function, you create a tuple, and then you get the type of the tuple, and then you will see that is a class tuple. And just now we have already done that. And here are some of the basic operations. The len, the plus for concatenation, the multiplication for the repetition, and then the in operator. They look familiar, right? Well, I really don't have anything to talk about because that is the third time you see those operations. You have seen them in the list, you have seen them in the strings as well. Okay, so for the lens, it will tell you how many items do you have from the top level. That is the part I want to remind you. Okay, and then well, for the concatenation, we are just concatenating two tuples together. And then if you want to do a in operator, and then you can check whether you have such a member as such a value as a member in a tuple. So you have already done that. And for the in operator, it can also be used to visit all the members of a tuple one by one. Okay, then like for x in this tuple. So for this tuple, we have the 1, that's the first item, A, B, C, D, the second item, and the subtuple 3 and 4, that's the third item. And for the fourth item, we have a list. that is interesting. So we can have a list inside a tuple as a member, right? Okay, and for the indexing and the slicing, they are kind of the same. And if you understand how to use the indexing to visit the members in a nested list and to visit the items in a tuple or in a nested tuple, that's almost the same thing. So let's see this example. Well, if you want to get the tuple with the index 1, and then that will be the second item, so the index 1 will be AA, BB. Okay, so it will be BB. And then how about the tuple negative 1 and 1? So for the negative 1, this means we are visiting the last item or the item on the right side. And then for the index 1, we are visiting, for the negative 1, okay, we are visiting this subtuple 5, 6, and 7. And then for the second index, which is 1, it will grab 6 for us. Okay, and how about the tuple negative 2 and 0? So can you tell me, if we are doing tuple negative 2 and 0, which value are we grabbing? We are grabbing 3 because negative 2 will give you this sublist, and then for the index 0, it will give you the 3. Okay, and what is this? So for the tuple, we have one colon, we have another colon. What is that? And that is a slice, right? And for this slice, and we didn't specify where to start, we didn't specify where to end, and then we just do a negative 1 as the step size. So what is that? That is the entire tuple flipped, or entire tuple reversed. Okay, and then how about the tuple 2 to the end? So well, 2 is the start point, so the index 2 will be included, and then where do we finish, or where does this slice finish? It will finish at the very end. So we are taking the 1.2 and then all the values until the very end. Okay. Well, and another thing I want to remind you is, well, remember when we are talking about this, we say a tuple is a immutable version of a list, right? So this means for a list, we can change the values in place, but we cannot do that with a tuple. Well, let me show you what do I mean. Say I want to have a tuple with 0, 10, comma, hello, and then comma 1.9, comma a 2. Okay, so this is the tuple. And now I want to say t2 and then square bracket 3 equals 1.8. Okay, I missed a square bracket. Nope. I typed it wrong. Okay, let me fix that. Okay, so well, we know if we are dealing with a list, we can do that. And now we are dealing with a tuple, and what I'm trying to do is, well, I'm changing the index 3 from 1.9 to 1.8. Okay, so does that work? Let's run that. It doesn't work. Why? Because tuple object cannot support the item assignment. So we cannot change the item using the index 3 because that is an immutable data type. Okay, so let's come back to this one. Okay, so here, well, we have a tuple, but in this tuple, we have a sub list. So we have a list inside a tuple as a member. So that is the 3 and 4, right? And then if you want to do tuple 1, 1 equals ABC, it works. So why? Because even though the tuple itself is immutable, but inside we have a mutable member. That member is the 3, 4 as a list. So when we are changing the 4 to the ABC, okay, this can be done. Okay, however, I think I missed a code here. Give me 1 second. Let me fix that. Okay. Yes. Okay, and then, but if we want to change the index 1 to ABC, so we are taking out the 3 and 4 as a member of the tuple, and then we are plugging in ABC, there will be an error. Because in the first case, we are not changing the tuple, itself, we are changing one member in the tuple. However, if you're doing this version, we are changing the tuple itself. We are erasing one member and then try to plug in another member in the same place, and then Python doesn't allow us to do so. Okay? Well, and for the for the tuple and list, they really share a lot of things in common. However, remember for the tuple, we cannot do a lot of things. Say, well, for the sorting. Well, in Python, if we have a list, we can do a sort. That is a dot sort. So in Python, we have that on the list. However, if we want to do that using a tuple, and Python will say there's no such sort in tuple. Why? Because that sort is a in-place sort. So, well, the problem will be if you have a tuple, how do you have all the items sorted? Okay, so we have the T, C, C, B, B, A, A, D, D, E, E. Okay, I want to have all the values sorted. So how can I do that? Well, we cannot have a sorting in place because the tuple cannot be changed. So how can we do that? Well, here is a trick. The trick is, how about we convert the tuple into a list? So I'm doing a temp equals the list of the T. So I'm casting the tuple into a list. And after that, I'm doing a in-place sorting. And after the in-place sorting, well, here is the thing I can do. I can convert the sorted list into a tuple back. Okay, so in this way, well, I have all the tuple, all the members of the tuple. I put them into a list. I got sorted, and then I'm converting that back into a tuple. Okay, so here is another question. Well, why do we want to have tuples then? Because, well, there are a lot of things we cannot do with tuples. So it seems that our hands are tied when we are using the tuples. So why do we have to do so? Well, and there are several answers to this question. And the number one, well, for some of the data, you may want to have the data kind of protected. This means, well, if you have something and then you do not want the any other part of your program to change that, it is safer that you put that into a tuple, because if you have a tuple and then all the members cannot be changed, they will stay as is. Well, if you have a list and then you started remembering that this list should not be changed, however, after writing another 100 lines of code, you will forget that. And if you change that value by accident, and then you may lose something. So in this way, well, it's better that you keep a group of the values. If you want to keep a group of the values unchanged, it's safer to put that into a tuple. And here is also another reason. Another reason is tuples can be used as a dictionary keys, because for the dictionary keys, they require immutable data. Okay, and what is dictionary? Okay, hold this question, because we are going to talk about that in the last two lectures. Okay, so let's move on. Well, now I want to move on and talk about do a very quick review of the sequence data type. So far, we have learned three sequence data type. We have the tuples, we have the strings, and then we have the list. And they can all be considered as a sequence of the items. For the tuple and the list, they are sequence of any data type. And for the string, they can only be a sequence of the characters, right? So they have a lot of the common things, and they are also different. So let's talk about difference. For difference, well, the tuples and the strings are immutable. However, for the list, they are mutable. Okay, and then well, for some of, and then we are going to start to see a lot of operations. And for those operations, well, if I don't say that, and remember, they will be applied, they can be applied to all three of the data types. Okay, so I feel this video is already long enough, and I'm going to stop this video and I'm going to continue in the next one.